finishing at 3:40, and if I don't stop talking, you should stop me. Because I'm very curious to know what you think of the reading. One of the pieces I just assigned for my American Culture SAS 334, which is Race and Digital Games. And the other one I wrote and put on the internet 6 months ago. So I haven't had a lot of time to think about it myself. But I'm here to plug a new thing that's an option just this year. So just 3 weeks ago, our college approved a new minor in digital studies. So very good timing for this class. If you're interested in digital media, or digital culture, or video games, or social media, or any of that stuff, this minor is a very attractive option. And you're lucky because you'll be probably the only ones that can get it. All the seniors they can't do it now. Sorry, that was something else. So I'm going to navigate really quickly to the web page for it. So if you look under American Culture, there is a page here for minors. So there's ethnic studies, African American studies, Latino studies. African American is a different department. Asian American studies. But this is brand new, and it's really easy. All you have to do is take one required course, which is American Culture 202 Digital Culture, and any 4 of these courses. So I'll try to make it bigger. So some of the options are things like the Race and Video Games course, Politics of Code, Numbers and Stories of American Experiences, so it's how to use data in writing about history. Oh, is it feedback? Oh, okay. Sorry, my standing too close to the mic. So, there's lots and lots of interesting courses here. Asian pop culture in the age of social media, video games as form, which I'm teaching this semester, digital rhetoric, history of computers, if you ever wondered where these devices come from that we spend all of our lives looking at all day long. This is a great minor and very flexible. So if you're considering going into a major that's kind of science or technology related, this is a good thing to have because it shows that you're not just a numbers cruncher. If you have any notion of going into the digital industries, social media industries, and if you're someone who's a humanist and really wants to stay in the world of reading and writing and not so into the world of numbers, this will, I think, distinguish you by showing that you know something about technology. Because unfairly, I think often humanists are imagined not to know anything about technology and not to care about it. But obviously we do. So I think this is a great thing to consider, and you should look at it if you have a mind to. So as I said, only 5 classes. If you're a SAC student, screen arts or communication student, or an American culture student, you'll take these anyway. Right? Those double count for you. And some of the topics I mentioned, social media, history of computers, gaming, how people use the internet, how they interact online. These are all fascinating topics, I think. Okay. So, all right. I wanted to show this slide to start off with. It was reproduced in that blog post I gave you, but it didn't come out that well. It's kind of little. So I tried to make it bigger. How many of you saw this and thought it was real? This is from The Onion. So maybe you guys are young enough to know, but my dad reads The Onion and thinks it's all real. And sometimes people are mistaken who should know better because The Onion is so good at simulating the news. I mean, they get really close to the bone, and they're so right on so many things. So when I saw this one, I knew it wasn't real because it was The Onion, but I just had to laugh because it is true, probably, long ago, that YouTube has reached over 1 trillion racist comments. Instead of YouTube commenters, they've been drinking the haterade, right? It's really pretty overwhelmingly negative and pretty harsh. Occasionally, there are certain kinds of YouTube content that produces very positive commenting. If you look at old 80s new wave music videos, a lot of the comments are just ecstatic, and they're all by people my age. I remember going to clubs and listening to New Order, and it was the greatest thing in the world. And people tend to be very positive about those kinds of videos. But if you go to hip-hop videos lots of times, or God forbid, Miley Cyrus, somebody like that, a lot of the comments are very, very, very racist and very sexist. It just seems to bring that out in people. So I'm interested in how and why YouTube has become a magnet for this kind of really racist and sexist speech, when in many ways racist and sexist speech is less tolerated in the offline world now than it was certainly when I was young. Do any of you hear much racist or sexist speech just around campus? You know, when you're walking around or, yeah?
At the dining hall.
The dining hall?
Yeah, there'll be a lot of sexist comments about females in particular.
Okay. Any other examples? You know, we have a policy against racist and sexist speech in public places on this campus, but I know that it is often ignored. I hope some of you are following the hashtag BBUM. Have you heard of this hashtag? You have not heard of it? Okay, has anybody heard of it? All right, can you explain to the people who haven't heard of it? So it stands for Being Black University of Michigan. Okay, yeah, any other detail anybody wants to fill in? Mm-hmm.
Well, it got so big that it was one of the main things trending on Twitter.
Yeah, right. So this became a viral piece of media, otherwise known as a meme. It became a meme, and it spread to other campuses. I know other campuses are doing this. But what's really important is it did force an awareness of this issue, not just on this campus. So some of you have never heard of it, which shows I must be wrong about hashtag activism. But there are a lot of people off this campus who have heard of it, as well as our provost, our president, and our dean in the College of Letters and Sciences. So this is an example about how there are serious climate problems around racism on this campus, but a lot of people are not aware of that, right? So racism is prevalent in YouTube. It's the exception, not really the rule in lots of cases. But I also want to stress it's not because people can't or don't talk about these things in real life. It's often that they are less open about it, but it still is there. And I think it's a serious problem, so I'm glad we're talking about it today. And it's a lecture that I give in my Race and Digital Games course. That's a 300 level course, and it counts for screen arts and also for American culture and processing. So, is anybody here a gamer and really interested in video games? No, it's one person. Okay, that's impressive. I suspect some of you are lying. Yeah? Two people. So what do you play then? So Call of Duty, FIFA is really popular right now. The video game archive. We have a video game archive that has every major platform and most video games in Duderstadt library basement. And I recommend it. I'm making all my students go there. It's really great. So I'm interested in griefing, trolling, and trash talking. And if you're not a gamer, you might not know what all these terms are. But if you are a gamer, you definitely know what these terms are. So griefing describes when players purposely try to ruin the game for other people. And there's lots of ways to do this. So to exploit the game, so you kill people in a way they can't really do anything about, or you spam them by screaming in their ear, or by typing things that are really cruel or really distracting. Trolling, you probably all know what that is, right? So trolling is making purposely inflammatory or irritating or abusive comments to get a reaction from other people. Right? It's rude, antisocial behavior, but it's really common in comment threads and forums. It's a way to hijack attention, to kind of harm people who are trying to pay attention to the topic. And trash talking comes from the world of sports. So you could say all of these are versions of the same thing. It's just that some of them are online specific or gaming specific, and some of them come from somewhere else. So, well, I'm interested in trash talk because the way people who do trash talk describe it often is that it's not about what they think or feel, but rather trying to bother the other person. Again, it's a form of trolling or instrumental speech, just trying to get a rise out of somebody, or better yet, getting an edge by distracting them. So in the world of sports, rattling your opponent, upsetting them, distracting them from the game is a way to get an advantage. But oftentimes, trash talking takes the form of sexist or racist or homophobic language. So the word fag is used a lot in Halo, right? And that's considered trash talk. So part of what I'm researching is whether this is something we ought to put in the same category as ordinary racism or sexism, why it's so common, and what the effects of this are on cultures like gaming and internet, where we all ought to feel comfortable, but in fact often we're kind of made very uncomfortable by these things. I'm specifically interested in how video games changed when they became voice activated, meaning when people could use the headphone to play games. Now I know only 2 of you out of this room of 70-some people play games at all, but I think that's pretty rare. Most people are playing something on their cell phone. What is this Flappy Bird thing everyone's talking about? I don't even know what this is, but I know my other students are playing it. Is anybody playing Flappy Bird? Is that what it's called? All right, is that a phone game? Okay, why is it so good? It's not, but it's just very fashionable. All right. So if we take all the games people are playing on Facebook, right? Games that you're playing on your phone, games that you're playing, on Twitter, right? You can say a lot of hashtags on Twitter are kind of game-like. Then there's a lot of gaming going on. Oh. And so part of the reason games are interesting to study, I think, is that if we want to understand the culture we live in now, computer games are the art of the popular, right? Most people won't go to an opera, they won't go to a museum, or they don't really want to. They don't really enjoy poetry, or they really don't read it, right? But when people engage in art today, often it's through popular media, and computer games are the popular art. That's what Henry Jenkins, who's a media theorist, says. And as Karsten Jensen says, who's a game theorist, what he wants to understand about games is how games are not simple to understand. There's the game itself, and then there's the content and the context in which the game is used. So playing a sports game by yourself is really different from playing it with friends in a room with you. And that's very different from playing it online with people you don't know, right? Because the expectations for conduct and behavior and language are different when you're talking to people you do know who are right there versus people you don't know who are not right there, right? So the second situation is probably going to result in more incivility, more racism, more sexism. And so what game studies wants to do is to understand how human relationships are understood through the medium of games. Because what games do is to structure social behavior. People want to be together and have a good time, but often it's kind of awkward without some kind of way to do it that has some kind of rules or some kinds of conventions. So often games are good icebreakers, you notice. There's this game Apples to Apples. Before that there was Pictionary. If you don't know people, you can still have a good time with them by playing a game with them oftentimes. I'm going to show a video that shows somebody who you might recognize. And if you do recognize them, you should tell me who it is.
My first time I hit I was playing, and I said something, and I said, "It's a nigger in here! Kill the nigger! The nigger!" And you know, I didn't know, but the only nigga here was people on my team, was my own team, killing me. They said, "You have been betrayed." And I come back alive now, and then, "You have been betrayed." They kept killing me, my own team, because I was a nigger. I talk a little trash when I get racist. You know, I'm not a black, white, Puerto Rican, whatever. I don't like racist people. I'm prejudiced against racist people. Let's say something. When somebody say something bad like a foul racist or something, you should get their address and just say it back to them. Man, dog, I know you at 45 Al Street. I know exactly where your trailer park at, man. Why you tripping? Trust me, dog. Trust me on this. If we was playing video games like the old school way, right next to each other, you would say nothing to me at all. You would cattle. You know, the internet tough guy. I just start laughing. They don't even know who they talking to. The baddest man on the planet. I don't want to talk bad.
Did anybody recognize who that was? Yeah? Who is it? Who is Rampage Jackson? Yeah, I think he's retired now. But I know he made this in 2004. So, Okay. So what did you think of that clip? What is Rampage Jackson talking about? What was your reaction to it?
A lot of people can act up behind the screen.
Pardon?
A lot of people can act up behind the screens.
Yeah, that's right. So when people can't be seen, they tend to behave worse than if they could be seen. Anything else? Yeah.
When you're online, there's less accountability for your actions, or like when you're playing a game.
Yeah, indeed. Though the people that he's describing who called him the N-word and who killed him were not people he didn't know. In fact, he said they were his friends. Right? So he's describing playing Halo online with a headset for the first time. He said as soon as they heard his voice, they started calling him N-word and shooting him. He said it was his own team. Right? Yeah.
There's no real repercussions for doing these things, like for saying bad things against them. It's only for like personal enjoyment, or just to like harass somebody else. So there's no actual like, I guess like regrets to compliment, because like no actions go against you.
Yeah, when it shows the picture of him and it says if they could see me, if they were sitting here next to me playing the old school way, they wouldn't say anything. I think that's pretty safe to say. He's describing having been bullied and harassed off of the game probably by a bunch of 12-year-old boys. That's what most likely happened, it seems to me. When you think about who plays Halo and who talks that way. And what's interesting about Jackson is that he looks like a character in Halo. His actual body resembles a Halo character. Halo is a first-person shooter game where everybody's extremely muscular and massive and kind of like, in a superhero comic book. And he actually looks like that. But as he says, he was basically racially harassed off of Halo by people who knew him because of hearing his voice. I was interested in what the industry is trying to do to regulate this kind of behavior, because it doesn't give gaming a good name when people like Rampage Jackson, or basically anybody. I mean, imagine you had a 12-year-old kid, goes online and gets called terrible names and shot all the time. So I started looking into how Microsoft, in particular, tries to regulate the Xbox environment, because that's what Halo is played on. So I was looking at a website called whywasibanned.com. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was run by a former moderator at Xbox who reads all the complaints that other players make about players who are violating the rules. Also, when players are reprimanded by Xbox itself, often they'll write to them and say, why was I banned? So here's an example of a gamer tag that somebody made. Do you all know what a gamer tag is? Does anybody not know what a gamer tag is? Okay. Well, a gamer tag is what people see when they decide who they're going to play with in multiplayer games online. Right, so this is your online identity. This is what people see. And so this guy made this gamer tag. And so it was taken down and he was banned, I think, for 2 or 3 days. So you can see what this is, right? Most game platforms have filters that look for specific words, right? And it will try and catch them using automation. But users are very clever about finding ways to get around word filtering. So this is one way to get around word filtering, right? So this is somebody who made this gamer tag, and they wrote an email to Xbox where they complained about being banned. And so this guy says, I have read multiple posts concerning the number of gamer tag changes over the life of an account who made me banned. I have had to do so, but I do not think my names were inappropriate. So this is a gamer who has a history of creating names that get banned, like this one. Because I don't think my names were inappropriate, including this one. I have quite a bit of money sunk into my account, and I have been an Xbox Live customer for over 5 years now, and I think it is quite unnecessary to ban me for life over a couple of gamer tag changes. However, if my suspension is uplifted, I will without a doubt make sure my gamer tag is nowhere near in violation with the terms. I am greatly frustrated with this ban and would totally ruin my relationship and good thoughts with Xbox. Not to mention, I would not be able to recover any of my online data. Please make my day and appeal my suspension. Thank you very much. So what do you think of this argument that this guy is trying to make?
Or he's basically saying, like, I changed a couple words on my profile and he banned me for life. Like I don't get it.
Yeah, he claims not to understand why his names are inappropriate. Do you think that could be true? No, absolutely not. This is an example of somebody taking a position in regards to retail rights, right, or consumer rights. He says, I've been an Xbox consumer and I've been paying my fees for 5 years. And if you don't unban my account, you're going to lose my money and my good thoughts with Xbox. Right? So he's trying to threaten that he won't give Xbox his money anymore. But he's not really admitting that the gamer tag that he made, this one, is clearly in violation of their rules around racist and sexist speech. Not to mention that it's probably really offensive to people of color who he's playing with. That's the point of doing it, right? And so refusing to admit that there's a problem with this is very symptomatic of what's called the post-racial ideology, right? They claim that racism is not a problem anymore, it doesn't exist, and therefore people need to stop thinking about it, right? Or stop talking about it. And people who do this kind of behavior are not taken very seriously a lot of times. So I'm interested in what kinds of techniques can be used for challenging these kinds of environments, which are clearly pretty toxic environments. The industry wants to do something about controlling them because it does harm the value of the product when people, like parents, see what's being said or heard on these games and don't want their kids there. So a lot of times you see parents and they object to their kids playing Modern Warfare because they say it's so violent. Right? Look at all the shooting and all the blood, or they look at Mortal Kombat or fighting games and say that is violent. Kids shouldn't do that. They might get in school shootings, or they might be violent, hit their friends, or do some other crazy thing. But if they're listening to the headsets that people were talking into and listening to, they might have different concerns. Not so much about violence, but about this kind of speech, which is pretty prevalent. So one way that the industry tries to control the environment in online gaming is by asking people to report or ticket violations like the one I just showed you. So if you see a violation like that that's clearly really offensive, you can send a ticket or report into whatever platform you're using, and they say they will try to address it. Obviously this isn't working though. Because if it were working, this wouldn't be as big of a problem as it is. It's there as an option, but it does not solve the problem. Another option that you see sometimes is communities decide they just don't like it and they're going to police it themselves. So they may do things like create systems to capture and publicize it when people are doing this to shame them, or to at least expose them maybe to others and help people protect themselves. I'm going to talk about one of those. Or they might do things like create their own ticketing system. If anyone's playing League of Legends, which is a pretty popular game, there's a lot of self-regulation in League of Legends, where players will read tickets and respond to violations. They won't have to pay the industry to do that. So I'm going to be talking mostly about user kind of vigilante moves to try and regulate the gaming environment without having to involve the industry, because the industry is so bad at it. So I wrote an article that should be coming out this year on a website called Fat, Ugly, or Slutty. If you have your computer up, you can look at it. And it's a really interesting site. It was founded by 3 women who were gamers and decided to take screenshots of all the times guys or abusive people said rude things to them or really sexist, scary things to them, and put it up for everyone to see. So this is a image that I had in the blog article that you guys read, and it's taken from Penny Arcade, which is an online gaming website, and it tries to theorize why these people are so crappy to each other online and why sexism and racism are so prevalent there. It says normal person, anonymity, audience equals this. Right. So I was critiquing this theory, saying that it's not that anonymity and audience plus normal person equal this, because it implies that all of us, if we were given anonymity and had a public forum, would do this. It's a really, really pessimistic view of human nature, right? So looking at people in terms of their pre-existing race and gender beliefs makes a lot more sense than saying that everybody is secretly, if you scratch the surface, dying to say these things. Because I don't think that's true. I do think, though, that gaming is a good place to address it because it's so common and it's so out there. I mean, people don't even try to censor themselves. So I'm going to show another short video that was made by a guy who was a devoted Halo fan, just like Rampage Jackson. Decided to play Halo like he always did. With one change, he changed his gamer tag to Gay Boy, but everything else was the same. So I'm going to show it to you now. Okay, so there's a lot more. This is exactly the same. And you'll notice that he blocked off the names, the gamer tags of other people here, but left his up. Right? So he's kind of protecting their identities of the people who said these things. So I'm just curious. Do you think you would hear this kind of speech, say, in your social life? Yeah?
Someone definitely would not say that to someone in person, but I think because of their online identities, there's no repercussions for saying those things, so they don't care.
That's a good point. But by making this video, in some ways you could say he's trying to create some accountability. But by taking people's names out, the accountability isn't really there in some ways, right? So it's a kind of interesting ethical move to protect people's identities, because if you were put out on the internet in a viral way saying this stuff, it might actually get to a lot of people that you knew, like say your parents. I assume these are kids. Some of them sound like little kids, actually. So this is the issue around what people can do to try and change the environment. This is a screenshot from Fat, Ugly, or Slutty. And it was sent to a woman, I think who was playing Halo as well, and I think she was winning. And so she got this message from somebody named Nickelback for Life, so, you know, I don't know. So, whoever Nickelback for Life is, they're now outed as somebody who says this kind of thing to people playing video games with them. And so part of the justification for doing this by the three women who started this site was that they wanted to make sure that people who were playing could avoid these players. So they could see who they were, and if they were in a lobby with them, they just wouldn't play with them, right? They could find a way to protect themselves. But they had the unexpected consequence of making these people very visible. So as she says, so here's another one. This one is interesting. It's pretty incoherent. It just tries to cover all the bases. Very vague. And here's another one. So these people, Nickelback for Life, Yamaha and Ass, and what the other one was. This is Duke Kane. So these are clearly not real names. But people do invest a lot of their time and energy and their identity in their gamer tags. As the person who complained about having his name banned said, I've spent 5 years of my life, I have all this content that I paid for online, I have an investment in Xbox, and if you ban my account, I've lost something really valuable. I interviewed the woman who does Fat, Ugly, or Slutty, And she talked about a case where somebody contacted her and said he hoped she would take down the post that he was mentioned in, maybe it was this guy, because his friends were Googling his gamer tag and finding fat, ugly, or slutty. So they were starting to identify him as somebody who was a sexist asshole. And he said it was harming him socially, that his friends were now making fun of him, and he was afraid his mother would find out. So he begged her to take it down. What do you think she should have done? Or he said, take it down, or yeah, take it. Do you think she should have taken it down? No? Or yes? Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and play devil's advocate here. Like, he's a kid, right? So, I mean, these kids are like 12 years old and they're sending these things. But the parents don't really know about this as much. I'm not someone who participates in this, but I think, if you're 12 or 13, you're putting someone on the internet, you're not going to understand the ramifications of that. Should someone that you don't know your friend, you don't know where it's going to go, and you don't understand what that means, should someone be able to, hold you accountable to that when it's really the parent's job? And I think there's an argument that can be made the other way. If it's an adult, I don't have a problem with it at all. But if you're a kid, that stays with you. And I don't think that's necessarily right either, or really solving it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to go the other way and say that maybe it does need to stay with you, because if you're a kid and this is like your gamer tag, I mean, it's not going to when you get older, it's not going to affect you like getting into college or getting a job. It's not your identity on there. The worst thing that can happen to you is that your tag gets banned and you can't play Xbox anymore. It's not a tragedy. And I honestly think that if somebody has that, their parents find out, then it's a lesson to make people know.
That's true. When you applied at University of Michigan, you didn't apply as Yamaha and Ass, you applied as John Smith. So in some ways, it's because his identities are temporary, right? There's less at stake. But if you play games 30 hours a week, which is conservative for a lot of people, there is a lot at stake, because that might be your social life, right? So these two positions are both interesting and I think valid. What the woman ended up doing is she did not take it down, but she blanked out the name. So she anonymized him, and she said it was because, just like you said, she thought he was a kid, kids make mistakes. If he learned how not to be, if he learned how not to use racist and sexist speech, it was valuable, and therefore he shouldn't have to suffer the consequences forever, right? On the other hand, if she told me she didn't know that he was a 12-year-old boy, he basically said that, and she chose to believe him, and so she anonymized it. But even though she didn't know, she thought that everybody needs to make mistakes, and this is how kids learn. Though the argument that he doesn't know what this means, I don't know if that can be true, even of a kid. It's pretty clear what this means, I think. Maybe what effects it would have on people. I'm not even sure that he wouldn't know that. But knowing not to do it, maybe, is part of what he needed to learn, and he hopefully did learn it. So here are some questions I tend to ask students in my class. My class is 70 some odd people, so it's pretty big. But these are questions that people discuss in section and might even write papers on in this class. So I ask people to reflect on what their own engagement with this may have been. Most of the students who take my class do play games, but not everyone does or even has to. You can never play a game in your life and still get an A+ in this class. We do play World of Warcraft in this class as a requirement, but you only have to play to level 20, so it's not that big a deal. It actually doesn't cost anything to play to level 20. And we play Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. So we talk about the industry, how it's regulated, how people are working out racism and sexism online, how they're learning to understand it, why there is so much conflict around these things. There's an ongoing controversy around the question of whether games themselves produce the behavior. Some people have said games with violent or negative fictions set in places where people are only shooting each other or killing things are naturally going to lend themselves to this kind of antisocial interplayer talk. Other people say what the games do is just act as a way for people's attitudes in everyday life to come out in a kind of consequence-free way. So maybe people really are thinking these things, but they can't really say them because of, you know, getting arrested or getting thrown off campus or having something else bad happen to them. Certainly games are a place where you see behavior that you're not going to see elsewhere, and that's partly why they're interesting. They're one of the least regulated spaces for communication that exist now. So when people talk about how American culture has become too PC and no one can say what they really think and no one can make a joke because they might get in trouble, games are a place where you can still say pretty much whatever you want, right? And there's some interesting things that come out of that and some really horrible things that come out of that. But that's why they're interesting to me, anyway. So I finished a little early, so I think we have a lot of time for more discussion or questions. I was asked to talk about the issue of what my discipline is, what the place of my work is in the university, what questions I ask. So these are the kind of questions that I ask. And my discipline, as you were saying before, is pretty multiple. I got an English Ph.D. in 1996 by writing about Henry James. There was no new media studies in 1996, and there was an internet, but it was pretty basic, and most people weren't using it, including me. So my first job was teaching literature, but I'm not that good at that, I hate to say. So I did that for a while. I started writing on chat rooms, actually, in 1995, and switched over all of my writing. So I've been writing on digital media since 1995. And I was looking at how in early chat rooms people would pretend to be different races and genders that they weren't. In 1996, very few women were on the internet. It was still a mostly male space, so maybe 6% of women were on the internet. So if you were in a chat room and 50% of the people in it were women, they weren't really women, right? And the same was true of online games. You've probably heard of the term MMORPG, massively multiplayer online role-playing game, which is World of Warcraft. In the gaming community in the 90s, it used to be abbreviated to Many Men Online Playing Girls, because there were 50% female and male avatars, but only 20% of the players were women. So there are a lot of men playing women. And in online chat rooms, there are a lot of Asian women who are actually white men, as I discovered in my research. And so I was interested in why people were wanting to pass as something else online. Some people said they were really in love with Asian culture and wanted to learn about it and pretend to be a ninja. Other people said they wanted to meet people, so being an Asian woman and acting sexy was a way to do that. So, you know, it's fascinating, way more interesting than Henry James, in my opinion. And so the place of this work in the university, I would say, it's kind of what media studies is having to become. Right? It used to be that media studies was a study of film, radio, and television. And at universities like University of Texas and University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I taught for a while, RTF was the name of the department, radio, television, and film. So it was about broadcasting, regulation, content, you know, classic radio shows. But basically, people today are spending more time online than they are listening to radio, watching television, or going to movies, or they're using the online environment to do all of those things. So devices that used to be used for watching television are now being used for playing games. Devices that used to be used for talking to people are now being used to watch television. So the media landscape is getting very complicated because of the digital platform that most of the media is running on now. When I taught a new media class in 2002, I used to ask my students how much time they spent on the internet and how much time they spent watching TV. And they would say, I spend like, 3 hours a day watching TV and 1 hour a day on the internet. But if I were to ask you how many hours a day you spend on the internet, I think it'd be more than an hour, for sure. It'd be a lot, maybe. So we have to change the way we study media because it's really altered rapidly in the last 3 or 4 years. 5 years ago, if you told someone you worked at an internet company, they would have felt sorry for you because they would have said, oh, your company's not making any money, you're going to get fired, You have to work long hours and your living is very precarious. But I'd say since then, the media industry, digital media industry, has become very, very promising. Those are jobs that people want to have. Working in a startup is seen as very exciting. There's lots of social entrepreneurship going on around digital media. So people who are doing important, amazing things for people of color or other marginalized groups or gay lesbian groups. And there's a group I'm studying called Code for America. Right, so you've heard of Teach for America, right? It's this kind of Peace Corps-like situation where you get a job teaching after college. There's a new organization called Code for America that teaches people how to program so that you can work for nonprofits or people who need it, activists or children's groups or something, and provide them something that they could really use, like maybe a video game or a website or an app that can help them publicize their cause or to create a better life for people in the world. So it's kind of philanthropy through coding, and they'll teach people for free. So it's a really great organization, and I recommend it. Okay, so does anybody have any questions, discussion on anything I said, or comments about digital media studies as a field? Or in the readings, yeah?
Well, based off what you said a few minutes ago, like different types of video games lend themselves to various comments, do you think that like sports games as opposed to first-person shooter games or games where the characters are less, less physically like aggressive, you might say, like you think those games are less conducive towards racial comments, or do you think it's just all the same on all online platforms?
If we had more time to navigate through that Fat Over Your Slutty website, some of the most disturbing comments and images are from a game called Words with Friends. So you know what Words with Friends is, right? Can someone describe it who knows what it is? Yeah, and you play it on your phone, right? Or on your iPad, usually. And it hooks you up with a stranger, and you play Scrabble together. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's draw something. All right, that's another one that you play. Is it like Pictionary with people, right? And so I've seen some really filthy, disturbing pictures that people have drawn to bother strangers, right? Or really crappy things people have said. So you could say that having the negative fiction or violent game content encourages this, but not having it doesn't guarantee you won't have it, right? So I don't know that there's a study that shows whether these games that are more violent create more violence, but I do know that you can find racism and sexism in every place where people communicate with strangers, right? So I was shocked when I saw draw something, what, people are drawing this? But yeah, it happens.
I guess I'm curious about your own opinion on the matter of, regulating internet space. Do you think it should be much more regulated, or do you think it's fine as it is?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, no one's ever asked me that before. Because usually I focus on what I think works and doesn't work, but I've never thought about what I think about it. I am really in favor of people being able to be pseudonymous. I think that's really important. So many people have said, if we want the internet to be nicer, everyone should have to use their real name. And that would take care of the problem. But I think there's lots of reasons why people shouldn't have to use their real name. For example, people getting stalked. That's not cool, and it's pretty common. Also, the internet is fun partly because of being able to make new identities. That's what makes it pleasurable and interesting and creative. So not letting people do that would be bad. I do think, though, that if you want to get people to stop being racist or sexist, trying to get the let's say you have a bunch of 5-year-olds and they're using that word to each other, right? That happens sometimes. Having the teacher tell them that they're in trouble is less effective than having their own classmates tell them that is wrong. So there has to be a way to let the climate police itself. I think that's really important. And that people who are haters tend to dominate this space because the people who aren't haters are too lazy to stop them, pretty much. Right? They just give up. So I'd ask how many of you are reading YouTube comments? Most of you said no, because the ones who aren't know why. Like, there's no point to it, right? It's just crap. It's just, we've ceded that territory in some ways, and I think we should reclaim it, because how else are we going to talk to each other, right? So I think that self-regulation is the way to go, which is why I'm interested in Fat, Ugly, or Slutty, because they decided, hey, we can't ban anyone. You know, we don't have the power to do that. But we do have the power to at least expose people who are doing it, and maybe that can deter them, right? Because shame is a powerful weapon. And often when people have it pointed out to them, hey, everyone can see what you did, they're like, oh God, I wish I hadn't done that, right? So I think that's a good way to go, in my opinion. Yeah.
I guess, like, I don't know, I think a lot of times, you just mentioned that shame is a powerful weapon. I just think a lot of times the punishments don't match up with the crimes. I just read a story about someone who posted something racist on Twitter last night, and she walked into work today and lost her job because the site picked it up.
What was the post?
Well, I mean, I don't want to read it, but it was saying derogatory things about one of the Seattle corners.
Is that football?
Yeah.
I don't watch.
So I'm curious what you think about, like, because what you're talking about is like self-justice is pretty much vigilantism. Do you think that's really, you know, justified or the right way to go with policing free speech?
Well, I don't know that I'd call that free speech exactly. I call that hate speech. I don't know what was said.
It's pretty similar to the thing.
Okay. Well, let's ask ourselves, if somebody went to work and said that to a coworker, would it be wrong if they got fired? No, some of you don't think it would. You think that would be fine, right? So if you go to work and someone calls you that, and they get fired, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think you would get expelled here if you did that, especially if you did a lot. Is it different if it happens on Twitter?
See, personally, I think so. I think that's your personal life and not your work life.
All right. Any other opinions on it? Yeah.
Yeah, we're going off of like that point. A few weeks ago with the Seahawks, like one of their players was very outspoken. It was like it was very polarizing, and Dexter.com, which is like a popular sports blog, went on Twitter and found like dozens of racially themed tweets about this player, and like the headline on the article on the website for like the next week was just these racial like stupid racial comments about British shows, and it's just a page full of them highlighting all these people.
Okay. So this is happening, right? This policing is happening, as I think you're saying, and so you're saying there's a difference between doing it in person at work, because that's your work identity, but doing it on Twitter is your off-work persona. Were any of you following the Phyllis Wise situation at the University of Illinois? This was a viral thing last week. Can you explain what it was?
A really nasty hashtag. It was basically at Phyllis. It was trending on Twitter because I think she was, I don't know if she was the president of the university or she was the
I think she's the chancellor.
chancellor or something, but she didn't cancel the school because, I don't know, it was really cold that day. The students were really upset. So she said on an email, hey, we still have school. It started a really nasty hashtag that went viral. And she's a woman and is she Asian?
Yeah, she's Asian American.
So all of it had to do with her being a woman. And then they said nasty things about being an Asian American. It was really bad.
Yeah, basically she got ching-chonged on Twitter a lot by students at the university, which is amazing to me, right? She's a chancellor of the university, and this happened. And then when it went viral, some people took down their tweets, but other people just were too dumb to know how to take down their own tweets, which isn't surprising considering what they had just done, right? So this trended because it was kind of a shocking example of how people are using Twitter to just say and do things that are remarkably awful, right? Really sexist and really racist. No student was penalized for it, right? She wrote a very gracious response where she said she was sorry that the students were so immature, basically. But she didn't single anybody out. Nobody was, punished for it. Though the question might be, should they have been, right? I mean, to say racist, sexist things against your chancellor is kind of like doing that to your professor and expecting an A, right? It's probably not a good technique or a good strategy, but basically we wanted that snow day really bad, and she didn't give it to them, so it went kind of south. Speaking again from the question of discipline, I teach as well in American culture, which is an ethnic studies unit, as well as an American history and literature unit. And so this is where the study of America or American studies is going as well. If we want to understand America, we have to study social media. It's totally important. Reading literature from 100 years ago is important, but talking about this stuff is really important as well. So ethnic studies tends to get really stuck on stereotypes and whether they're good or bad. There's nothing wrong with that. It's something we should study. But I think some of these topics today, which is how people are expressing thoughts about race and sex and gender and different parts of social media, are really important as well. And no one knows how to study them. That's the other thing. This is a new field, and some people are working by interviewing people. Some people are doing what I'm doing, analyzing online products that people are making or video. Some people are doing textual analysis of Twitter or data mining Twitter. But no matter what, this is really crucial to study, A, because there's a market for it. Right? A lot of my colleagues got hired at Microsoft and Intel because they want to develop products that work better, and this is part of it, right? Making environments civil and usable. But also, people want to study this because we want our society and our culture to be ethical. And this is something that matters to everybody, especially as America is becoming a minority-majority society. Many people believe that, when cities like LA have become majority-minority, meaning that racial minorities are the majority, this will make it a less racist environment. But in fact, that's not really true. It's kind of surprising, but it has not really happened. So it's still, we're studying how race and ethnicity work, and if we're going to do that, we need to do it where people are, which is to say, online.
With some of the new game consoles that are out, they have voice recognition, and so during some online gameplay during sports games, if you swear, it can boot you off.
Really?
Yeah. So I was wondering, what would you think about that? Would you be in favor of it? Would you think that it would lead to more intelligent conversation, or would it just be something that should be against?
So the question was, some of the new consoles have voice recognition, and if you use certain words, it'll just boot you off the game. So no one will report you, you'll just automatically, you'll be off. And what do you think?
I was wondering yours.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's bad. I like swearing. I do. I've got nothing against swearing. Swearing is great. It's really, expressive, important language. Sometimes you need it. But I am against racism and sexism. So I think, as we were saying before, context matters so much, right? Tone, context, who is targeted against, what the situation is. You really can't automate censorship, right? Or I won't call it censorship. You can't automate regulation. Really, people have to be the ones who do it, right? So anything that can empower people to create environments that are less racist and sexist, that's what matters to me. I think it'd be terrible if you couldn't swear online. Oh my God. What would happen to the internet? No one would use it. Looks like we're done.